The interview was weirdly non-combative. They were treating Farage like he was, Hugh Grant's prime minister in Love Actually. It's just sort of part of the political furniture now. He was sitting there saying that the population explosion is going to ruin the country and we need massive immigration reform. And they weren't tearing their hair out. And the typical headlines didn't ensue that, Nigel Farage is going to crawl out from under the bed of every migrant child and smother them with his bare hands.
Breaking right now, Connor Tomlinson has written that Nigel Farage has a mandate from heaven to become the next Prime Minister of the UK. And what is fascinating looking at what's gone on this week is there has been a massive 180 in terms of how the Labour Party is now dealing with Farage. It is going to be a full throttled attack. But the problem is, and you can see from what I'm about to show you in the House of Commons, Nigel just loves it.
To ask the Prime Minister for some advice, what do I say to 25,000 constituents in Clacton, including...
Get on. No, you've got it. No, we're not both standing at the same. Look, I need a quick question, then I can get you the answer. Come on.
What do I say, Prime Minister, to 25,000 constituents in Clacton, including 99-year-old Jim O'Dwyer, who flew a full set of missions on Lancaster bombers as tail end Charlie, as they're losing their winter fuel allowance, feeling the pinch, whilst at the same time we're prepared to give away a military base and pay £18 billion for the privilege of doing so.
Mr. Speaker, he talks of panic. The only panic is people using the NHS who know that under his policy he wants to charge them for using the NHS. And what he should say to the people of Clacton when he finally finds Clacton is that they should vote Labour because we're stabilising the economy and boosting the jobs.
Mr. Speaker, many of my...
And as Belinda DeLucy, close ally of Farage, former Brexit MEP, posted, the heckling, disrespect and shouting over Nigel Farage at PMQs is a gift to reform. A clear sign the establishment sees Nigel and team as a major threat to their grip on power. A political revolution is on its way and they can't stop it. So Connor Tomlinson joins me now. Connor, this was an absolutely fascinating piece from you. And I think it's best for me to leave it to you to describe why you believe Farage may have the mandate from heaven.
Well, first, I must remark upon that clip that you just showed, Dan. It's no wonder that Keir Starmer is so keen to do an AI deal in the UK, because it seems that he's using AI to write both his responses and his blooming press statements. But there you go. So as for Farage, I mean, the title of the piece is, does Nigel Farage have the mandate of heaven? And it's a reference to an old Chinese phrase. They said that the mandate of heaven is a description for unforeseen historical forces that confer legitimacy upon a king. It's like he has the mandate from heaven, hence why he should rule. And I was thinking about this in the light of two events. One, I was out in Washington, D.C. with our mutual friend Liz Truss, and Farage told the room that he could be prime minister, slip of the tongue, by 2029. Now, we can all be cynical about that and say that obviously every single political party has to say that because they have to live up to their own hype and sort of manufacture consent for their own legitimacy and have people vote for them. But then the thing that convinced me was not that bluster in that particular drinks reception or even the polls that show Reformer at the top, but it was this strangely calm This Morning interview with Ben and Kat Deely. Can't remember all the details of the host names, but right beforehand, the thing that came out of it was that Farage on the Lunar New Year was ambushed by this Chinese lion costume. And so that overshadowed the contents of the interview. And I'm not shocked that it did, because the interview was weirdly non-combative. They were treating Farage like he was, Hugh Grant's prime minister in Love Actually. It's just sort of part of the political furniture now. He was sitting there saying that the population explosion is going to ruin the country and we need massive immigration reform. And they weren't tearing their hair out. And the typical headlines didn't ensue that, Nigel Farage is going to crawl out from under the bed of every migrant child and smother them with his bare hands. Instead, it was just normal. And so it felt very much like the same vibe shift that I was seeing in Washington, D.C., where people were walking around with MAGA hats, open carrying Trump paraphernalia, as it were, without fear of violent reprisal. Trumpism was in the ascendant, and it became in the ascendant just because it was so self-evident problems of America were affecting ordinary Americans that Trump became the sensible option. And it feels like now, yes, a combination of the polls, but also the fact that the media aren't shrieking and screaming as much as they were about some of the things that Farage is saying, even though he's still saying some very confident things that we would like him to say. It feels like the mandate of heaven, the historical forces, are settling upon Farage as ascending to Downing Street when it comes time by 2029.
I have to say, this interview, Connor, you are so right to point to it, because it was completely striking for not what happened within the interview, but the fact that the interview was so anodyne, was so boring. It's exactly the type of treatment that woke ITV has always given on its daytime shows to Nicola Sturgeon, for example, a politician who they consider non-threatening and who they view as a celebrity rather than a threat. There was no hard challenge of Farage whatsoever. I could actually see his face, and it was like, when's it coming? When's it coming? You know, when are they going to come for me? And it just didn't. And I think that is a real change in the fact that he is now a mainstream figure. Of course, a lot of the woke people at ITV kind of were horrified by the fact that he said within the interview he thinks that it was his appearance on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here that actually resulted in that change. But first, something really important to talk to you about. Scammers and spammers who are out there to ruin your life. We've all experienced more and more of those spam emails, text messages, and robo phone calls. Not only are they annoying and really time-consuming to deal with, but they usually represent a gross invasion of your private information that can cause vast reputational and financial damage. And I mean, how the heck did they get your information in the first place? Well, it's likely as a result of data brokers who know everything about you, your health information, relationship status, mortgage details, so much more actually, and then sell it for a profit. These data brokers can directly or indirectly expose sensitive information to bad actors, putting you at risk of identity theft. The number of data breaches worldwide rises every year. According to the annual data breach report by the Identity Theft Resource Center, it actually went up by 72% in 2023. This means that you and your loved ones are at a constantly increasing risk of data breaches as growing lists of data brokers hold your personal information. That has then been sold or published online without you even knowing about it. Let me tell you how shocking the consequences can be. Health insurance companies could actually raise your rates based on your online activity. Huge loans have been taken under people's names without them even knowing about it. And scammers have even started to use AI to, wait for it, mimic the voices of friends and family to trick victims into sending them money. These imposter scams rely entirely on the voice data they can find online. While you can ask these data brokers to delete your personal information, the process takes hundreds of hours to do manually and requires repetition. But the good news is that today I have a solution for you that I use and personally endorse. Go to incogni.com/outspoken and get 60% off an annual plan. Now, Incogni reaches out to data brokers on your behalf, requests your personal data removal, and handles any objections from their side. The whole process is automated, ensuring that your data stays off the market by conducting repeated removals and taking your data down if it pops up again. That's what makes the yearly subscription especially advantageous. Now, I do the annual plan so that I'm constantly being taken off these lists. It truly is a simple process. Create an account, grant Incogni the right to work for you, and they will contact the data brokers on your behalf to request your personal data removal. It has helped me so much. You can go to incogni.com/outspoken and get 60% off. That's 60% off an annual plan right now. It could be the most important decision you make. But now, back to the show.
Yeah, it's not that I don't think they have taken down the dartboard with Nigel Farage's face on it in the ITV studio or anything, but in this particular interview, he was allowed to just sit there with his novelty socks on and laugh everything off. And what was most telling is when they did launch a loaded question at him about Elon Musk saying that he should no longer be the leader of Reform UK over their disagreement about the treatment of Tommy Robinson. Rather than in previous interviews where Farage got a little bit defensive, we all know his LBC interview where he accused Robinson of something he didn't do via a slip of the tongue. Rather than get defensive, he just brushed it off. He successfully spun it, actually, into saying that the world's richest man won't make me compromise on my principles. So whether or not you think that was the right thing for Farage to say, he positioned himself as the unassailable, confident person in the room, and the interviewers were coming to him rather than him trying to seek the limelight. And the same thing has happened in the Commons. Pretty much any time he's asked a question, Farage has been very good with all of his questions prepared in the Commons and all of his various debates. It seems like he makes the right interventions at the right time with complete clarity and laughs off any unwelcome interruption and petty squabbling and heckling by the school children on the opposite benches. And that's not an exaggeration, by the way. Look at some of the Labour MPs. Literally, they're right out of university. He just laughs that off and he looks like the man of the moment. Now, we might still say Nigel Farage has some ability to occupy some vacant room in the right of the Overton window. With the Conservatives running to the left constantly, the left side is a very crowded market these days, and Reform has the opportunity to be a proper national populist patriotic party, especially since Donald Trump has proven not only how popular these policies are, but the fact that they can work. And we might still say Nigel needs some guidance. There is some room for encouragement with Reform. There's the need for new faces, new voices, new policies to be proposed. But there are also some encouraging signs on that front, because when Donald Trump and Tom Homan, the bulldog that he's put in charge of ICE, are now deporting hundreds of people a day of the violent foreign criminals that have invaded the US under the Biden administration, Farage decided to do a direct-to-camera address and say, look, our countries are different, but the principle is the same. And it seems like he and Rupert Lowe are now getting on the same page about the strength of necessary immigration policy to deal with the crisis in this country. So I'm seeing encouraging signs, not just from Reform in terms of rhetoric and policy, which is hardening up as we would like them to, but also in this growing self-confidence that, yeah, we might actually be able to do this thing.
And look, there are lots of signs that this is a bigger change. For example, Connor, just this afternoon, a Labour councillor who, and in fact, she was the sole Labour representative on the Ashfield District Council, confirming that she has defected to Reform UK. Now, there is Cathy Mason alongside Lee Anderson. And of course, that journey, that switch mirrors Lee Anderson's. I mean, he was a staff member, a Labour staff member for Gloria Di Piero, and then ended up replacing her as a Conservative MP. So while you can just say, okay, this is one councillor, it is indicative of a bigger change that's coming, isn't it?
I will caution Reform over this. It's encouraging that we're seeing so many people take the lead on a political realignment, and that is really what's happening. But without leaking any private communications, I have warned to sympathetic senior ears in Reform to be discerning as to who you accept as a defector. Someone like, as previously mentioned, Robert Jenrick, who was literally sitting in a teal tie during that Sun interview, I happened to notice. Sure, he might be a worthy asset to the cause. The same with Suella Braverman, particularly over this Chagos deal, given that Mauritius is close to her heart and her family history. But someone like Marco Longhi, who was fighting in Rupert Lowe's seat when he was a Brexit Party MEP and didn't have great words for the beloved Mr. Lowe himself. One, I don't know if it was a wise admission, and two, it shouldn't have been announced like they just acquired a star striker in a football trade. The same with, for example, Priti Patel. Now, Priti Patel has been a long-time friend of Nigel Farage, as we remember, perhaps a little bit sorely, Dan, that they would do karaoke together at the GB News events. Now, I'm not saying that Farage can't be friendly with Patel. I certainly wouldn't, after the treason that she's wrought on this country by using 250,000 Indians every year as, quote, living bridges to the Modi regime under her immigration policy. But the best thing that Patel ever did was defend that immigration policy on the Sun, because it makes her too radioactive for Reform to accept. But the question I always had before she did that is, would Priti Patel be welcome in Reform, despite doing more damage to this country through her immigration policy than someone like Tommy Robinson, who has already been told categorically no without ever asking to join? So I think they need to be very careful about, from whichever party it may be, Labour, Conservatives alike, it's not going to be any Lib Dems, is it, to apply stringent criteria on who should be allowed in, because some
Exactly.
will be benefits to reform and some will not.
Make sure they're not careerists. Make sure they're doing it for the right reason. I will just quickly read out what Lee Anderson had to say, by the way, about Cathy Mason joining, because he's certainly not underplaying this. Lee said, "This is a seismic moment for Reform UK. The first Labour councillor has defected to us today, and it's happened in the capital of common sense, Ashfield. Cathy will be the first of many to join Reform UK from Labour, and she will be one of millions to leave Labour to vote for Reform UK at the next general election." Thank you so much for watching Dan Wootton Outspoken. Please click on my face just to the bottom left to subscribe to this brand new independent news source and turn on the notification bell so you'll be alerted to our brand new live shows, uncancelled interviews, and special royal episodes. Outspoken is also now available as a podcast, so you can listen to the show every weekday on the go, wherever you are.